Hello folks, thank you for stopping by to check out my channel. This is Civil War Reports, and if you are interested in the American Civil War, this channel may be for you. So please show this channel your love. Give me a big, huge thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Today I am back on the Gettysburg battlefield, and I'm going to bring you another episode about the Battle of Gettysburg. Hello and welcome back to my channel, Civil War Reports. I am your War of the Rebellion reporter, Brian Thomas Kopak, and today we are going to be taking a look at the Union attack at the railroad cut. The effort to drive Davis's brigade from the railroad cut on July 1st, 1863. And right now I am in front of what was the Moritz Tavern during the Gettysburg campaign, and it was in that building that General John Reynolds slept his final night on Earth. Wrapped in a blanket, sleeping on the floor, he fell asleep the night of June 30th in the Moritz Tavern. Now, let's talk about John Reynolds very briefly. I mentioned this in previous episodes, but it bears repeating. He was the commander of the First Corps Army of the Potomac. He was also the left wing commander for the Army of the Potomac, which meant that he was in command of not only his First Corps, but also the Third Corps under Dan Sickles and the 11th Corps under General Oliver Otis Howard. The 11th Corps would be engaged on July 1st. That's for a whole nother episode. But also on the night of June 30th, Howard met with Reynolds there in that tavern before heading back to Emmitsburg, Maryland to be with his corps. On the morning of July 1st, Reynolds was awoken, he was read some orders, and the impression I get is that I don't believe Reynolds thought there was going to be a battle or much of a battle in Gettysburg on July 1st. He doesn't move either himself or his corps with any real great alacrity first thing in the morning. There doesn't seem to be any real necessity to get to Gettysburg all that quickly, although one thing will happen, and I'll talk about that in a moment, which gives an indication that Reynolds did realize that maybe infantry or the presence of infantry was needed at Gettysburg as quickly as possible. So let us take a little trip up the Emmitsburg Road towards Gettysburg, and I'll tell you what happened near Marsh Creek the morning of July 1st. I do want to point out that what was the Moritz Tavern is now privately owned. I'm not sure if it's a private residence. I know at one point it was a business, but it is privately owned. It is not a museum. Please do not stop and knock on the door and ask for a tour of the house. I'm not sure if you'll get one. I doubt it. So please respect the private property. You could drive by it. You could slow down. You could look at it. But please do not... it's private property. Respect the owners. That's all I'm asking. I'm now standing along the Emmitsburg Road right here at Marsh Creek, about a mile north of where John Reynolds established his headquarters at the Moritz Tavern. So Reynolds is awoken at around 4 in the morning. He's read his daily orders. Again, this is around 4 in the morning, about 3.5 hours before the first shots are fired for the Battle of Gettysburg. And the impression I get is that he really didn't sense that a battle, or at least a major battle, would take place on July 1st. Doesn't really seem to move with all that much alacrity. Doesn't really put his corps in motion at first light. But I do get the impression that he felt that something was going to happen that day that would require the presence of Union infantry in and around Gettysburg. Why do I say that? Well, where I'm at if you had been here on the morning of July 1st, you would be in roughly the same position that the 1st Division of the 1st Corps Army of the Potomac was at. Now, under normal circumstances, when armies are marching, the division that was in the lead the day before would wait for the rest of the corps to pass, and that division that was in the lead on June 30th would then be in the rear on July 1st. That was not the case here. That was not the case. The 1st Division was ordered onto the road as quickly as possible, bypassing all of the usual Army niceties about the 1st Division, in this case it was the 1st Division, on June 30th waiting to march in the rear on July 1st. No, they were ordered onto the road by 8 o'clock. And that's what happened. The 1st Division got on the road while the rest of the Corps was still getting ready. So by about 8 o'clock in the morning, from this position, the 1st Division of the 1st Corps begins to make its way towards Gettysburg. Somewhere along the march from Marsh Creek to Gettysburg, an event took place that has been mentioned here in Harry Fans's book, Gettysburg, the First Day. And I want to read one paragraph from that book to you, because I think it gives you an idea of what kind of people were in the 6th Wisconsin, and we're going to be hearing a lot more about the 6th Wisconsin in just a few minutes. Unfortunately, it doesn't document where along this march on the Emmitsburg Road here, where it took place. But let me read this to you, because I think this is a very important paragraph in terms of showing you the mindset of the 6th Wisconsin as they marched into battle. Private James P. Sullivan, whose pen name was Mikey of Company K, wrote that the men of the 6th Wisconsin were in good spirits while on the march, and that the soldiers of Company F, Germans from Milwaukee, struck up a, quote, soul-stirring, end quote, marching song, quote, such as only Germans can sing, end quote. The regiment marched in step during the singing and gave Company F 3 cheers when it finished. Company K, also of the 6th Wisconsin, responded with a song whose lyrics began, quote, on the distant prairie where the heifer wild stole into the cabbage in the midnight mild, end quote. It sang some others too, including one called, quote, Patty's Wedding, end quote. Now this is where I think it gets a little interesting. They were in good spirits, bolstered by a rumor passed along the column by a staff officer that General McClellan was back in command of the army. The men cheered like mad at this news, and some shed tears of joy. The merriment ended as they approached Gettysburg, and they heard the bark of artillery and saw smoke puffs from shell bursts. Gives you an example of how much the men loved McClellan even, 9 months or so after he was relieved of command. It's also very interesting, too. It makes me wonder, unfortunately I haven't been able to find any information out one way or another on this, is whether or not the men of the 1st Corps had learned that 3 days earlier, General Hooker was replaced by General Meade. I mean, did they honestly think that after only 3 days and not being battle tested, that Lincoln was going to replace Meade and return McClellan to command? Well, maybe a little bit of both. Maybe they didn't know that Hooker has been replaced, and let's not forget the last time that General Lee brought his army north of the Potomac, Abraham Lincoln did put McClellan back in command of the army. So that is not a completely far-fetched rumor for soldiers to believe. But as we know, McClellan was not returned to command as the two armies converged on the small town of Gettysburg, and that General Meade would be the newest and ultimately last commander of the Army of the Potomac. Because let's remember, General Grant never commanded the Army of the Potomac. He was General-in-Chief who just happened to place his headquarters with the Army of the Potomac. But that gives you an idea, a little bit of a mindset of how the 6th Wisconsin, how the men of the 6th Wisconsin were thinking as they marched up the Emmitsburg Road and to their destiny. The Kadoorie House and the Kadoorie Barn, about 4.5 miles north of Marsh Creek and just on the outskirts of Gettysburg. Now, while the Kadoorie House and barn and farm would make its way into history during July 2nd and July 3rd, July 2nd when Wright's brigade charged the Union Center, and also on July 3rd when General Pickett's men crossed near that barn there in the house during Pickett's charge. It does also play a role on July 1st. You see, General Reynolds rode ahead of his troops and met with General John Buford up on Seminary Ridge. He then turned around to basically spur on his corps to get them to Seminary Ridge as quickly as possible. In this general area where I'm standing on July 1st, General Reynolds comes riding from town, meets with General Wadsworth of his first division commander, and basically, as we all know, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. He orders the fence over here to be knocked down and for the 1st Division to go across the fields to Seminary Ridge. And that is what happened. Which, by the way, just in case I didn't mention it, the 1st Division of the 1st Corps of the Army of the Potomac consisted of 2 brigades. Meredith's Iron Brigade and Cutler's Brigade. Those 2 brigades would be the first ones engaged, infantry-wise, at the Battle of Gettysburg, and they would be the ones that would take on Archer's Brigade and Davis's Brigade, and it would be Davis's Brigade that would be in the railroad cut. So let's find out what happens when they take the shortcut across the fields to the seminary. I'm currently standing on East McPherson Ridge. For those of you who are new to studying the Battle of Gettysburg, or you haven't been here, on the day 1 battlefield, the family that owned this area, their name was McPherson. Their barn is still standing. I'll show you that in a moment. Unfortunately, their home has been lost to history. But there are 2 ridges that bear their name, and often described as East McPherson Ridge and West McPherson Ridge. In the distance is Seminary Ridge. You can see the Lutheran Seminary buildings in the background. The area between, the low ground between the ridge I'm on now and Seminary Ridge is called the Swale. All right, before we talk about what happened in the Swale, let me just take a brief moment to show you what I mean by the other ridges. The other ridge is called West McPherson Ridge. You can see the barn there. That is still standing. And off in the distance, let's see how well I can position this here and show you. Right there is the equestrian statue for General John Reynolds. And that is West McPherson Ridge. And the area I'm going to be talking about where the fight at the railroad cut took place is right in front of us. Unfortunately, I don't have a strong enough lens, but off in the distance you can see to the right there's 2 monuments right here. The one on the right is for the 95th New York, which we'll talk about shortly. The one on the left of it is for the 6th Wisconsin. And just on the other side of the bridge, off in the distance there, is a monument for the 14th Brooklyn. So let's talk about these three regiments and what happened here. So as I mentioned earlier, as the 1st Division of the 1st Army Corps was marching up the Emmitsburg Road towards Gettysburg, they decided to take a shortcut and went across some fields to get to the seminary as quickly as possible. And they basically came out on the right-hand side, and the Iron Brigade went into position in the woods right in front of me. Let me turn around and show you. Most of the Iron Brigade, exception of one regiment, which we'll talk about in a moment, went into the woods here to engage Archer's Confederate Brigade. You might be able to see at the monument over there, that is for General John Reynolds. That's where he was killed on the morning of July 1st. And as I mentioned in a previous episode, the woods you see in front of me here were vastly different in 1863. If anybody's familiar with goats, they're scavengers. They'll eat just about anything. This area used to be used as a picnic ground, believe it or not, for local residents. And goats would come in here, they would eat all of the underbrush, so you could actually see through these woods even in the summertime. And that area, like I said, was used for local residents for picnicking. You could see right through these woods, you could see Archer's Brigade coming online. Now, all but one regiment from the Iron Brigade took part in the battle over here. The other one, the 6th Wisconsin, well, that was a different story. Let's talk about the 6th Wisconsin. So when the 6th Wisconsin arrived on the field, they didn't go into the woods in front of me. They came through the swale here, and they were ordered to head towards the railroad cut because Davis's brigade were there in force. And the 6th Wisconsin, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Rufus Dawes, began to charge across the field towards the railroad cut. Now, as Dawes was heading towards the Chambersburg Pike, beyond that, the railroad cut, he did have a horse shot out from underneath him. Give you an idea of just how intense the fighting was here, even early on in the battle. And his men did report that as they were going across this swale, heading towards the Chambersburg Pike, they noticed for a couple of soldiers carrying a body wrapped in a blanket. That body was most likely that of General John F. Reynolds. When Dawes' men of the 6th Wisconsin got to the Chambersburg Pike, the railroad cut was only about 200 or so yards in front of them. However, for the most part, you couldn't see the Confederates. I mean, they were in that railroad cut, and they thought they were secure. Now, Dawes and the 6th Wisconsin would be joined by Major Pye of the 95th New York, which I got to say, the 95th, part of it was recruited in my home county of Rockland County, New York. Not all of it, some of it. And they would be to the 6th Wisconsin's left. To the left of the 95th would be Colonel Fowler and the 14th Brooklyn, also known as the 84th New York, but the 14th Brooklyn never used their federal designation, from what I understand, except when it came time to get paid. Then there were the 84th New York. Other than that, they were quite proud of their New York State designation as a militia unit as the 14th Brooklyn, and that's what they took into the Civil War. But anyway, I digress. So it was realized that the only way to dislodge those Confederates would be an all-out charge about 200 yards from the Chambersburg Pike to the railroad cut. And from what I understand, the charge was not done with all three regiments moving at one time. It was really done a little bit in piecemeal, with the 6th Wisconsin stepping off first, followed by the 95th, followed by the 14th Brooklyn. And they rushed so quickly, the Confederates really had no chance to escape or to prevent the Union troops from making it to the railroad cut. I am now standing in front of the monument for the 14th Brooklyn. Might be able to see it's the only one of the three regiments that has a monument west of the bridge that goes over the railroad cut. Just want to point out, 14th Brooklyn, they and the 95th New York were part of Cutler's Brigade. If you go back and watch the episode I did on Davis's attack here on the morning of July 1st, Cutler had 5 regiments in his brigade that morning here at Gettysburg. 3 of them were placed north of the railroad cut. The 95th and the 14th Brooklyn were placed alongside of the Iron Brigade. The 14th Brooklyn is one of the few regiments here at Gettysburg to have 3, believe it or not, 3 monuments here at the Gettysburg battlefield. This is the most elaborate one they have, but also on Meredith Avenue they also have a smaller monument there. They also have one on Culp's Hill. So originally the 95th and the 14th were off near McPherson's Woods, but when duty called and it came time to drive Davis's brigade out of the railroad cut, the 14th and the 95th, we'll take a look at their monument in a moment, joined the 6th Wisconsin from the Iron Brigade to push Davis's brigade out of the railroad cut. Well, here are the monuments for the 6th Wisconsin on the right and the 95th New York on the left. They're pretty much right next to each other. I'm not sure if this is as accurate as it should be, because there's my understanding that the 6th Wisconsin would have been a little closer to town, and the 95th New York would have been a little closer here to the bridge where I'm standing. But you can see the railroad tracks in the background. So let's go down into the cut and get an idea of what it would have looked like for the Confederates. Okay, folks, I'm down in the railroad cut. We're going to walk the length of this here, just to give you an idea. Now, here is not so bad. It's not so deep. The area behind me looks like an area in which soldiers could easily escape out of. Also want to point out that I am on the railroad tracks. This is an active rail line. Please do not do what I'm doing. Enjoy what you're seeing through this video. Do not, if you can avoid it at all costs, do not come down onto the tracks themselves, because it is an active line and I don't want to see any of my viewers get hurt. But you can see in the distance there's the Chambersburg Pike. You can see the cars going by. So this area would not have been so bad to defend, but let's take a look as we go further west along the cut. All right, you could see hopefully off in the distance there the traffic lights along the Chambersburg Pike that would allow you to turn and come to the bridge here that overlooks the railroad cut. Part of this is going to be artificially inflated because they did, need to build up for the bridge here. But as you can see, as we were walking along the railroad cut here, it is getting higher and higher. It's no longer easy for a man to stay on his feet and fire. Now, had this been World War I mean, this would have been a really great trench. I'm not as familiar with the weaponry of World War I as I am with the Civil War, but if I remember my history correctly, the German rifle had a 5-shot clip, and that was a bolt-action rifle. Had this been World War I, this area probably would have been extremely easy to defend. But World War I was 51 years in the future, and what the soldiers had was the musket. So as you can see here, this is got some rock here. It's a good distance up. This would have been very difficult. So as you get here, as you can see, this would have been a death trap. And it was not unheard of for when the Union forces overrode this area, that the Southern men just retreated down the unfinished railroad cut. A number of Davis's men were captured as a result. Also want to point out, I don't know how many people know this, but as recently as the fall, the autumn of 1998, a soldier, there's 14 Brooklyn Monument, a soldier body, skeleton, was found somewhere in this area. I don't know the exact location. Turned out it was identified as a Mississippi soldier from Davis's brigade. So with the 3 Union regiments coming on, charging this area, Davis's brigade, which was only 3 regiments strong here on the morning of July 1st, had no choice but to either surrender or risk being shot as they ran down the unfinished railroad cut. Here's what's written on the 95th New York Monument. July 1st, 1863, this regiment was formed south of the McPherson House and engaged the enemy at 10 a.m. At 10:30 a.m., changed front, advanced to this position with the 84th New York, as again also known as the 14th Brooklyn, and 6th Wisconsin, repulsed and captured a large part of Davis's Mississippi Brigade in the railroad cut. The distance that the 6th Wisconsin had to cover from the Chambersburg Pike to the railroad cut, this field in front of me here, was really less than 200 yards. I have to wonder what was going through the mind of those men as they charged the Confederates in a very defensive position, not knowing anything about the terrain. Now, according to their monument here on the Gettysburg battlefield, they went up against the 2nd Mississippi. And according to their monument here, now you got to keep in mind, the 6th Wisconsin went into battle with about 420 officers and men. Decent sized regiment for a Union regiment in the middle of the war. And according to their losses, well, 30 killed, 116 wounded, 22 missing, for a total of 168 casualties out of that 420. Hey folks, you know, one of the reasons why I love doing this channel is because I meet a lot of great people, including this young man here. What's your name, buddy?
AJ.
AJ. And he asked me to take a picture of him and his family in front of the North Carolina Monument. And you know what? Are you the next generation of historians? Are you going to be studying the American Civil War when you get older?
I gotta be crazy when I take a video.
You're taking a video. Okay, all right. You want to study, going to read about the American Civil War when you get a little older?
Yes.
Yes, all right. All right, next generation of Civil War historians right here. All right, young man, I was very pleased to take a picture of you and your family in front of the North Carolina Monument here. You enjoying your time here at Gettysburg today?
Yes.
All right. Have a great one.
I have a map to let us go somewhere, and I can...
Did you say a map of ghosts?
A map to help us go somewhere.
Oh, a map to help you get around the battlefield. Okay, that's great. You're the tour guide for your family?
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, you know what? let's end this. I'm going to end the video that I'm making today with this clip. So, you know what? For Civil War Reports, I am your War of the Rebellion reporter, Brian Thomas Kopak, along here with AJ. Until next time, thank you very much for watching, and thank you very much for being in the video with me. Have a great day. Love it. And if you like what you saw today, please hit the subscribe button. Give a thumbs up. Also, notify your friends. Let them know about this channel and ask them to subscribe as well. If you like, you may leave a question or a comment below, and perhaps I will answer your question in a future episode of Civil War Reports. Until next time, please keep the history alive.